Welcome to another episode of True Crime Tales, where we uncover the darkest depths of human behavior. Today, we explore a chilling case from Metairie, Louisiana, a quiet suburb that became the scene of a brutal murder following a twisted affair. This is the tragic story of 18-year-old Brandon Thibodeau, whose life was cut short in a crime that stunned the community. Brandon was a young man full of dreams. At just 18, he was a senior at East Jefferson High School in Metairie, a suburb of New Orleans. Known for his academic skills and love for cars, he spent countless hours working on engines, hoping to one day open his own auto repair shop. Friends often saw him in his driveway, hands covered in grease, as he worked on old cars with a passion that drove his dreams. Brandon lived with his grandmother, Mabel, who was blind and relied on him for daily care. Despite his age, he took on this responsibility with remarkable maturity, balancing his schoolwork, a part-time job at a garage, and his caregiving duties. Neighbors frequently commented on his kindness and willingness to lend a helping hand. For the past 2 years, Brandon had been dating Lee Gerard, a driven young woman with similar hopes for the future. They talked about getting married after graduation and building a life together. Brandon saved his earnings to take Lee out to nice places like Café Bull, where they'd share their dreams over a good meal. The young couple seemed inseparable, destined for a bright future together. But beneath the surface, there was a dark and dangerous secret. Brandon had become entangled in an affair with Lee's mother, Poet Gerard, a 43-year-old businesswoman who ran a multi-level marketing company called Beauty Buys. Poet was successful and attractive, but often had a complicated, competitive relationship with her daughter. Brandon's relationship with Poet was a secret that weighed heavily on him and created complications he hadn't anticipated. Despite his ambitions, this affair would soon lead to a tragic and violent ending, shattering the peace of Metairie. On the morning of August 12, 2021, the summer heat was already pressing down on Metairie. Around 8 a.m., Mabel noticed something felt wrong. She hadn't heard Brandon moving around as usual, and concerned called out to him. When there was no answer, Mabel, unable to see, managed to reach her phone and call a neighbor, Mrs. Alice Dupree, for help. Mrs. Dupree, a retired nurse, lived 2 houses down and had known Brandon since he was a child. She rushed over, hoping it was just a misunderstanding. When Mrs. Dupree entered the house, an unsettling silence greeted her, and a metallic smell hung in the air. She called out for Brandon, but the quiet persisted. Following the scent, she reached Brandon's bedroom, where she found a horrific scene. Brandon's lifeless body lay sprawled on the floor, surrounded by blood. He had been brutally stabbed multiple times, and his eyes showed signs of violent trauma. The bloody knife lay nearby. Frozen with shock, Mrs. Dupree struggled to dial 911, her normally steady voice breaking as she reported the horrifying scene. Within minutes, police and paramedics arrived at the small, 1-story home on West Metairie Avenue. The flashing lights and gathering crowd added to the sense of disbelief as neighbors tried to process the tragic event unfolding before them. The responders, shocked by the gruesome scene, would carry the memory of that day for years to come. Mrs. Dupree, though initially calm, was visibly shaken as she leaned on a neighbor for support. Meanwhile, Mabel, still in her chair, kept asking what was happening, unaware of the horror just a few rooms away. The once quiet neighborhood was now the center of a horrific crime that would forever change the lives of those involved. The community of Metairie would be left reeling in the wake of this brutal tragedy. The investigative team arrived at Brandon Thibodeau's home shortly after Mrs. Dupree's 911 call on the morning of August 12, 2021. Leading the case was Detective Michael Duval, a seasoned officer with over 20 years of experience, known for his no-nonsense approach and dedication. Working alongside him was Detective Renee Martinez, a sharp, detail-oriented investigator known for her keen eye. As they entered the home, the scene in Brandon's bedroom was both overwhelming and tragic. Blood splatters covered the walls and floor, a grim indication of intense violence. The metallic smell of blood mixed with the oppressive heat of the August morning, amplifying the scene's horror. Brandon's body lay on the floor, bearing multiple stab wounds and injuries around his eyes. A blood-stained kitchen knife lay nearby, a common household item turned deadly weapon. Despite his experience, Detective Duval felt a heavy sense of dread surveying the scene, immediately sensing that this was more than a random act of violence. It seemed deeply personal. To him, this wasn't just a murder, it was a crime of passion. Detective Martinez began documenting the scene, carefully photographing each detail. They gathered evidence meticulously, noting the knife, blood patterns, and any fingerprints, all of which would later be analyzed to reconstruct the crime. The rest of the house remained untouched, including the living room where Brandon's grandmother, Mabel, sat unaware. This suggested that the attack was sudden, likely taking Brandon off guard during his morning routine. Outside, neighbors gathered, whispering among themselves, trying to process the tragedy that had rocked their quiet community. Detective Duval knew that time was critical. He immediately assigned officers to canvass the neighborhood, hoping someone might have seen or heard something unusual. In a close-knit place like Metairie, he knew there was a chance someone might hold the key to solving the case. The first suspect. The first person the detectives focused on was Poet Gerard, the mother of Brandon's girlfriend Lee. At 43, Poet was a striking figure in Metairie's social circles, known for her beauty and success in running a multi-level marketing company called Beauty Buys, which sold cosmetics and skincare products. Though some locals were skeptical of her business, Poet thrived in the spotlight and enjoyed the financial perks that came with it. Poet's relationship with her daughter Lee was complex. They appeared close, but friends had noticed an underlying tension, often stemming from Poet's jealousy over Lee's youth and beauty. Poet's competitive nature took a dark turn when she began a secret affair with Brandon, her daughter's boyfriend. While she tried to justify this relationship as a way to reclaim her youth, her obsession with Brandon became evident, and the secrecy surrounding the affair hinted at something more dangerous. When detectives Duval and Martinez brought Poet in for questioning, she appeared calm, dressed immaculately in a tailored pantsuit with flawless makeup. However, a nervous flicker in her eyes hinted at unease. The detectives started with standard questions, inquiring about her relationship with Brandon and her whereabouts on the night of the murder. Poet claimed she was home alone, working late on her business. She described Brandon as a sweet boy, but minimized their relationship, referring to him as just her daughter's boyfriend. As the questioning intensified, her composure began to crack. When Duval confronted her with evidence of the affair, Poet's demeanor shifted. At first, she denied any involvement, but soon, the pressure overwhelmed her. Tears welled up as she confessed to the affair, but she maintained her innocence regarding Brandon's murder. "He was my angel," she sobbed. "I would never hurt him." Despite her emotional reaction, Detective Duval remained skeptical. Poet's intense jealousy and obsession with Brandon made her a strong suspect in his death. As the investigation unfolded, the detectives knew they were only scratching the surface of a twisted and tragic story. The second suspect was Lee Gerard, the 18-year-old daughter of Poet Gerard and Brandon Thibodeau's girlfriend. Lee was a recent high school graduate, set to attend the University of New Orleans in the fall, with plans to study business management. Friends and family described her as a bright, ambitious young woman who was often overshadowed by her mother's dominant personality. She and Brandon had been dating for 2 years, and they had discussed marriage, a prospect that had thrilled both of their families in their close-knit Southern community. However, the shocking revelation of her mother's affair with Brandon left Lee devastated and furious. Although she professed her innocence regarding Brandon's death, the emotional toll was evident when detectives brought her in for questioning. Wearing jeans and a high school senior class t-shirt, Lee appeared drained, her grief making her seem younger than her age. Detectives Duval and Martinez began gently, asking about her relationship with Brandon and how she discovered the affair. Lee's voice shook as she explained that she had accidentally come across explicit texts between her mother and Brandon just days before his death. The discovery led to a heated confrontation between her and Poet, but Lee insisted she had tried to move on. "I loved Brandon, and I didn't want to lose him," she whispered, voice trembling. However, her alibi for the night of the murder was shaky. She claimed she had been at a friend's sleepover nearby, but struggled to recall specifics. Her friend, Taylor, confirmed Lee's presence, but noted she left around midnight, a few hours before the estimated time of the murder. As detectives pressed further, Lee's sadness turned to defensiveness, insisting she had no role in Brandon's death. When shown evidence of the affair, including Poet's explicit messages to Brandon, Lee broke down in uncontrollable sobs. Her grief was raw and palpable, yet it raised questions. Was this pure heartbreak, or was there something she wasn't saying? Although she adamantly denied involvement, her unclear alibi and intense emotions left Detective Duvall uneasy, suspecting there might be more to Lee's story. The third suspect was Richard Gerard, Lee's 47-year-old father and Poet's husband. A well-known lawyer in Metairie, Richard had built a reputation as a skilled, if sometimes opportunistic, personal injury attorney. His busy work schedule kept him away from home for long hours, but he maintained a strong public image and took pride in his perfect family. While Richard was often absent, he wasn't entirely oblivious to the tension in his household, including Poet's flirtations and attention-seeking behavior. He admitted he had suspicions about her interest in other men, but chose to ignore it, hoping it would pass. When police called Richard in for questioning, he appeared calm, dressed in a crisp white shirt and tie. Duvall and Martinez started by asking about his relationships with his wife and daughter. Richard described his marriage to Poet as complicated, but claimed they were close. He also noted that while he and Lee had a good relationship, his long hours kept them from being as close as he'd have liked. The detectives then brought up Brandon. Richard expressed that he liked Brandon and thought he was a good match for Lee. But when confronted with the affair between Poet and Brandon, Richard's demeanor changed noticeably. He clenched his jaw and avoided eye contact. He claimed he only learned of the affair after Brandon's death, stating, "If I had known, I'd have ended it immediately." When questioned about his whereabouts on the night of the murder, Richard said he was working late at his office, preparing for an upcoming trial, and provided names of colleagues to verify his alibi. Despite his calm responses, his body language suggested he was uncomfortable, perhaps hiding something. His reluctance to discuss the affair and his apparent detachment raised further questions for the detectives. Although Richard continued to assert his innocence, his evasiveness left Duvall and Martinez suspicious. They couldn't help but feel there was more to his story than he was letting on. In mid-August 2021, a crucial tip came in, reshaping the investigation's direction. Detective Duvall received the call around 3 p.m., with an anonymous informant claiming to have critical information about Poet Gerard, a central figure in Brandon Thibodeau's murder case. The caller hinted that Poet was hiding more than just an affair. There was a darker secret lurking beneath her polished image. Acting quickly, the detectives headed to Poet's office in a modest building on the edge of Metairie. The sign above the door read, "Beauty Buys," the name of the multi-level marketing company Poet had run for nearly 10 years. From the outside, the office appeared like any small business, but inside, the detectives would uncover far more disturbing evidence. Entering the office, they were struck by the eerie quiet. Shelves were lined with beauty products, yet no employees were present. Detective Martinez noticed a locked door at the back, and after some persuasion, Poet's assistant, a nervous young woman, reluctantly handed over the key. Behind that door was Poet's private office, and what they found was shocking. The walls were covered in photographs of Brandon, many of them intimate or even inappropriate. In one corner stood a makeshift shrine dedicated to him, adorned with candles, trinkets, and handwritten notes. It was clear that Poet's obsession with Brandon ran much deeper than an affair, but that wasn't the only discovery. The detectives also found documents revealing the darker side of Beauty Buys. Far from being a legitimate business, it was a pyramid scheme that preyed on struggling low-income women, particularly single mothers. These documents exposed how Poet had convinced these women to invest thousands in beauty products they could never sell, leaving many in severe debt and forced to work long hours to pay off what they owed. The exposure of Poet's fraudulent business practices added a new layer of motive. The stress of maintaining her image, combined with her infatuation with Brandon, may have pushed her to murder. With this new evidence, the police were closing in on a clearer picture of Poet Gerard, a woman who would go to any lengths to protect her secrets, even if it meant taking a life. The arrest. On August 21, 2021, after gathering ample evidence, the Metairie police were ready to act.
With the disturbing findings at Poet Gerard's beauty buy's office, they had no doubt about the true killer behind Brandon Thibodeau's brutal murder. At 43, Poet Gerard was well regarded in the community as a charismatic businesswoman running Beauty Buys, a multi-level marketing company. But beneath her polished image lay dark secrets.
Evidence revealed that she had been romantically involved with her daughter Lee's boyfriend, Brandon, for several months. When Brandon attempted to end the affair to focus on his relationship with Lee, Poet's obsession took a deadly turn. On the night of the murder, Poet confronted Brandon in his grandmother's kitchen, a place they had often met in secret. Fueled by jealousy and desperation, Poet seized a kitchen knife and attacked Brandon. The violence was shocking, leaving him with multiple stab wounds and nearly gouged eyes. In a desperate attempt to conceal her actions, Poet tried covering her tracks, but her obsessive behavior and fraudulent business dealings eventually led detectives right to her. Early on August 21st, the police arrived at Poet's suburban home just as dawn was breaking. When she answered the door, still in silk pajamas, she was clearly unprepared for what was about to happen. The detectives informed her calmly that she was under arrest for Brandon's murder. Poet's reaction was a mix of shock and defiance. Though she tried to keep her composure, her panicked eyes betrayed her. As she was handcuffed and escorted to the police car, neighbors watched in disbelief. Many had admired Poet for her apparent success, unaware of the dark truths behind her facade. News of her arrest quickly spread through the community, and by the time the police car drove away, the neighborhood was buzzing with speculation. Back at the station, Poet was booked and placed in a holding cell. During the interview, she denied everything, insisting on her innocence. But the mountain of evidence against her was overwhelming, and the police were confident they had their suspect. For Brandon's family, Poet's arrest brought some sense of closure after weeks of fear and uncertainty. While the case was not fully resolved, with Poet Gerard in custody, the police were one step closer to delivering justice for Brandon Thibodeau. The trial for Poet Gerard, charged with Brandon's murder, was set to begin on November 8th. The trial. In November 2021, the Jefferson Parish Courthouse in Metairie, Louisiana, became the center of attention as the trial of Paula Gerard for the murder of Brandon Thibodeau began. The high-profile case attracted significant media coverage, with local outlets like the Times-Picayune detailing each development. The courtroom was filled with spectators eager to see how the prosecution and defense would present their cases. Assistant District Attorney Mark Tremble, a seasoned prosecutor with a reputation for thoroughness, led the prosecution. At 52, Tremble was known for his relentless pursuit of justice. From the beginning, he portrayed Paula as a woman consumed by jealousy and obsession, who murdered Brandon in a fit of rage when he attempted to end their affair. To support his case, Tremble presented physical evidence and investigator testimonies, revealing Paula's business, Beauty Buys, as a fraudulent scheme preying on vulnerable women. This furthered his argument that Paula was a manipulative, dangerous individual. Defending Paula was attorney Charles Chuck Lemoy, an experienced lawyer known for his calm demeanor and skill at creating doubt in jurors' minds. Lemoy argued that the evidence against Paula was circumstantial and suggested that someone else, possibly her daughter, Lee Gerard, could have committed the crime. He sought to portray Paula as a loving mother and a successful businesswoman unfairly targeted by the media and the prosecution. As the trial unfolded, the emotional toll was visible, especially on Brandon's family. His grandmother, who had raised him, attended every day, holding a worn photograph of him. His girlfriend, Lee, sat with her father, visibly shaken by the proceedings. Tension filled the courtroom, particularly during the lead detective's testimony, as he described the brutal nature of Brandon's injuries and the evidence linking Paula to the crime. On November 22, 2021, after 2 weeks of testimony and only 4 hours of jury deliberation, the verdict was announced. Paula Gerard was found guilty of first-degree murder. Tears of relief filled Brandon's family members' eyes, while Paula remained stoic, though visibly pale as the word guilty echoed through the room. On December 1, 2021, she was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The sentencing marked a harsh but fitting end to a case that had shaken the community.
While Brandon's family felt some relief in the verdict, their loss was irreplaceable. The trial also exposed Beauty Buy's dark practices, prompting further investigations into the company's operations. For Brandon's loved ones and the Metairie community, the conclusion of the trial was a step toward justice, but it also left an indelible scar. Aftermath and impact. In the months following the trial, life in Metairie gradually returned to normal, but the tragedy cast a long shadow over the community. The close-knit neighborhood, where everyone once knew each other's business, was forever changed. The Girard family home, once lively, became quiet and somber. Paula's life sentence created a void in her family that was difficult to fill. Her husband, Richard Girard, a prominent lawyer, struggled to move forward. Although he continued working, he withdrew from social gatherings, often avoiding the curious glances and whispered conversations that trailed him everywhere. Lee Girard, Paula's daughter, faced her own emotional struggles. The revelation of her mother's affair with Brandon and his brutal murder shattered her world. Soon after the trial, she moved out of Metairie to attend college in another state, seeking distance from the painful memories. Friends noticed a change in her. The once bright, ambitious young woman had become more reserved, haunted by the trauma. The trial's aftermath also rippled through the broader community. Beauty Buys, Paula's multi-level marketing company, came under intense scrutiny. Investigations revealed the extensive financial and emotional damage the business had caused, leading to its eventual shutdown. Many women who invested in the company were left in severe debt, their lives turned upside down by the deceptive scheme. Local news outlets like WWL-TV continued to report on the fallout, turning the scandal into a cautionary tale about the dangers of predatory business practices. In the end, the trial and its repercussions left a lasting impact on everyone involved. It was a somber reminder of how quickly lives can unravel and how the consequences of one person's actions can ripple through an entire community, leaving behind broken lives and lasting scars.